So, did you also do your homework? Did you read the document? Yeah? Yes? No? To be a good activist, you must engage and read and all of these things. Okay, so this document called #Gridlock Carbon is really about a rolling program of action for next year to further place climate justice on the map in South Africa and to help us build a movement. Now it's a proposal coming from COPAC, and it's a proposal trying to identify key moments for next year where we can have a catalytic impact in the country around mass building or mass politics. Now, while it's coming from us, and while we are going to attempt to raise resources for this, this is not about a COPAC program of action. This is about us finding each other and uniting and bringing our own capacities, resources, etc. into the struggle. COPAC, not the movement. I have to keep on repeating this point. It's each of you, it's your organizations, it's what you are going to stand up for and contribute. Now, as we heard yesterday from the science, we are running out of time. Climate change has begun, but we have exactly 10 years to prevent catastrophic climate change or climate breakdown. So this is a very tight and narrow window for activism. And it requires each one of us in this room and every conscious person in this country to work out where they stand in relation to the struggle. We need an activism that is going to mobilize every fiber in our being, every bit of passion, every reserve of commitment to make things happen. The 10 years is it. After 10 years, we can't have a gathering like this. We can't talk about addressing the climate crisis. We can't talk about building a climate justice movement. It's too late. It's too late. Now is the time to act. So, last year on September 20th, there was a call for global action from Fridays for Futures. And many of us rallied to that moment. And in the South African context, it threw up a host of forces that all stepped up and took a message around the climate crisis into the public sphere. And that's a good thing. But again, we can't have popcorn activism. We can't have pop-up activism. We also can't just download the struggle from wherever. We've got to build a powerful movement. And we've got to have rolling action. That's crucial. So, in the course of last year, the September 20th moment or event was one of many things we were doing as part of the Climate Justice Charter process. One of the things we achieved, we think, is deeper solidarity with drought-affected communities. Our first roundtable last year was with drought-affected communities. Hi. Hello.
It's working.
Is it working? With drought-affected communities, yeah, I don't know. Okay. And we think that that has deepened. Comrades in the Eastern Cape have now started self-organizing and building a provincial network, and many of them are in this meeting. They are at the front line of the drought crisis. And we are here, they are here to build solidarity with us and the broader struggle, but we also need to build solidarity with them. I was just told by Pat on the news this morning, Graf Renet is dry to the bone, okay? So this is the living reality that we're going to have to contend with. We have also engaged SANEF last year. We had a media dialogue, and they committed to a climate justice partnership to build capacity in the media. And we still have to deepen this. We invited Kate Skinner. Is Kate here? She was meant to come from SANEF to be part of this deliberation, but people like Mandy and others were part of that, Kevin Bloom and so on. But the media needs to do more in South Africa. And we have to think about how we push them based on the relationships we are building. We've developed convergences. There are convergences with labor-based organizations, faith-based organizations, youth and children's initiatives, and so on. We need to deepen those convergences. coming out of these months of activism. And this moment, this conference, the charter, is also meant to deepen that. We also rallied self-organizing capacity around the September 20th action. We went to Sasso, and it's clear that the symbolic impact did, if you like, find expression even inside Sasso. They recently issued their commitment to the climate crisis, and their report talks about a glib 10% reduction of emissions by 2017 levels by 2020. It is not enough, it is dismal, and it falls way short even of regulatory obligations. So the struggle has to continue against this very big polluter. So we were able to, if you like, in the course of this year, achieve some of those breakthroughs. But where's the government in all of this? The government is moving in the opposite direction. There's a lot of lip service. So there's a lot of add-on to the National Development Plan, which supports fracking and more mining and so on. This is the double speak of the South African state. It's a carbon-centric state. And we must not be bamboozled and hoodwinked by this nonsense that we've experienced for over 26 years. So you have a Minister of the Environment also talking about an adaptation strategy and so on in the context of a crisis-ridden state. Most of our local governments are not going to be able to implement that adaptation strategy. It's a fact. They dysfunction. Okay? So again, it's going to be a lot of greenwash and green speak, but it's not going to be efficacious. It's not going to move this country in the direction that it needs to move in. But what looms large is that when it comes to the drought, and many of the activists in this room can bear testimony to this, the state is failing our society. It's failing these communities. And that's very, very patently clear to those that are affected by this. The Integrated Resource Plan is a disaster. The Integrated Resource Plan calls for coal to still be dominant in our mix, energy mix, for the next 10 years, till 2030. 60% of our energy mix will still be coal, despite the crisis. This is that 10-year window that we have. We have a government that is completely addicted to coal, despite, again, bringing it down marginally in the energy mix. They are shifting more and more to gas, and gas emits a greenhouse gas, and so on. So they're also talking about extending nuclear. They're also talking about, well, I mean, there's a whole set of issues around Eskom. Now, when it comes to Eskom, there is a roadmap that government has put out, but there are various things that are not clear in that roadmap. How workers and mining-affected communities, particularly coal mining, are going to be part of the just transition. Those details are not clear. Whereas in places like Germany or in places like Spain, there are clear just transition plans. That's not articulated. It's also not clear how socially owned renewable energy is going to be supported in the Eskom roadmap. So even if it's restructuring, how are they going to support communities developing their renewable energy pools? It seems as though they're going to go the route of a IPP-led renewable rollout in the country. They're going to give more power to corporations, even in the renewable energy sector. So we have a government that's moving in a direction that is against the imperatives of addressing the climate crisis. And that means we have no choice but to step up and to intervene at this historical moment. That means we've got to disrupt. That means they've got to hear us. That means society has to be shifted in this battle, in this struggle. So the one form of disruption is symbolic disruption. So yes, the children lead. We have all this amazing stuff which we must continue doing, but it's not enough. It's not just about raising the alarm bell. We've got to take our activism to another level. The second form of disruption is to take the fight to the carbon criminals, to the carbon polluters directly. We did that a little bit with the human chain, which was symbolic, around Sasso. But we now have to think about gridlocking them and stopping their activities, because that's where it hits hard. Okay? So whether it is the coal corporations, the shipping industry, the airline industry, the financiers of this carbon energy system, we have to take the fight to them. The other form of strategic disruption actually is building alternative pathways, advancing all the alternatives that are there in the Charter. The Charter uses, when it talks about alternatives, it uses the language and the imagination of movements that are championing those alternatives already. Zero waste comes from waste pickers. Food sovereignty comes from small-scale farmers and peasants, and so on and so on and so on. These alternatives are being built now. They are exits from the system. We need to intensify that form of disruption. If we build an alternative food system around Philippines and other small-scale farmers in the city of Cape Town, that completely impacts on the industrial agricultural food system, for example, and so on. So we need to think creatively about disruption. Disruption has to be symbolic so that it attracts interest, it attracts and has appeal. It has to be decisive in terms of the circuits of carbon capitalism, and it also has to be about building the alternative future. So what are we proposing for next year? Well, the program to #Gridlock Carbon sets out 4 objectives. The first is to have non-violent resistance and to consider occupations of offices, blocking traffic, flash mobs at key sites, blockading entrances to key sites, marches, street sit-ins, and so on and so on. These are tactics that will, if you like, stop the rhythms of everyday life. Imagine massive traffic jams in Sandton from 7 to 9, and we are on the street sitting at robots, etc., etc. You completely shut down Sandton. Okay? And that's where most of the finance houses are, that's where Sasol is, that's where the stock exchange is, and so on. Imagine if we do that effectively for 3 hours. Okay? But what does that require? What capacity, what kind of activism are we ready to step up to fight that kind of fight? If we get arrested, are the legal NGOs willing to stand with us? So we've been talking to the Center for Environmental Rights, we've been talking to Legal Resources Center, and they are part of this process. The Legal Resources Center discussion has been about how do we position you to support us if we get arrested. I'm sharing this information with you. So we're not just doing this glibly. We're very serious about it. We're actually even talking about raising some funding so that legal resources can be there on standby if we get arrested, and so on and so on. This is a serious thing. It's not like the UK, Extinction Rebellion, and so on, where the middle classes have resources. We don't. Our activists from township community don't have resources. So we don't want to put you in a difficult position. You support your families, you do many, many other things. So we've got to be very careful and very thoughtful about this action. We've got to deepen the understanding of the climate crisis and deepen support for the Climate Justice Charter in our organizations, in our communities and workplaces. That is another objective of the program for next year. We have to take the Charter into our local spaces to affirm that they are people's responses to the climate crisis, that people have answers to this problem. The movements that are struggling have answers to this problem. Because people need to have hope. The government is happy to keep the people either ignorant or let them know that they are doing some kind of half-hearted thing and induce some kind of normality, or on the other hand, the government just doesn't care. Okay? So we've got to get people to appreciate that action can happen, it's imperative, and it has to happen now. And the Charter is part of the way forward. We've got to build momentum for the big climate justice assembly we want to have in Cape Town next year. And we really want to use the mass action in Cape Town to call the bluff of our politicians and our political parties. Okay? So Section 234 of the South African Constitution provides for charters to be adopted by Parliament. Now, of course, most of these parties sitting there are not taking the climate crisis seriously. But it will be a crucial moment if we can go there and present our final charter to them and say, adopt it as per Section 234 and demand it as citizens. If they don't do it, Again, we are discussing a legal option of taking Parliament to court to compel Parliament to implement Section 234. That will open up a national debate in the country. Why are these activists demanding this charter? What's in this charter? Why is this charter important for the country? And so on and so on. And so the struggle will be deepened at that moment, if you like. That social tipping point will further be strengthened. But the other point is this, is that even if they adopt the charter, the struggle doesn't end there. What we are building is a movement that will drive this charter despite or with or beyond Parliament. That's the important point here. Parliament is not the culmination of our struggle. It's not the end point of our struggle. We need a movement over the next decade that can shift society, that social tipping point, that can build the pathways, that can open up the building of an ecological society. We also need to think about a legal strategy to complement mass politics. It's not a substitute. I mean, going to the courts must not take away from mass building and mass power. But we do need legal support. We need to think about areas of intervention again that can bring about that social tipping point. And we've been talking to some of the legal NGOs about how we do this. So in brief then, and to wrap up, there's a couple of proposals we are making here, practical for next year. We want to have 2 activist schools, again, to bring activists together to work through the detail of the gridlock tactics. Okay? We also want to develop a tool, and many of you said this yesterday, that will accompany the charter. So, you know, explaining a bit of the science, explaining some of the technical words, etc. We've got to find the balance. We can't dumb down, but we've got to have an accessible approach to the knowledge, while at the same time raise the level of our activism. Okay? We've got to raise the level of our activism. We can't be, if you like, lazy about some of these things. We've got to invest in ourselves. You've got to read. Because if you're going to step up and lead your community in Namakwe and all of that, you're going to have to know what we are talking about. Okay? So 2 activist schools to work out how we do all of this. We're also talking about 3 key climate justice actions that will be national actions. One in Sassolberg together with Verja, and that's why we have Verja on the panel here. One with the trade unions on 1st of May. So this year when we handed over the memorandum to Sassol, we said we'll be back on the 1st of May. Okay? So this is where the idea of gridlocking Santon becomes very, very important. And this we want to do together with the unions, and that's why we have Sizwe on the panel from Naledi, which is a think tank of Kusatu, and they've been part of this process. We also want to work with rural movements, and particularly Eastern Cape, which is at the front line of the drought. So we want to have another national action there. And the purpose of these national actions, comrades, is to build solidarity. Is to build solidarity with Verja, build solidarity with the unions, build solidarity with rural communities, and vice versa with the larger movement. So how we do that has to be done in partnership. We have to work together. What we are building mustn't take away from local agency, local leadership, local power. It must always strengthen that. Okay? We also are calling for local assemblies next year. And we are willing to assist local communities and organizations to have assemblies on the charter, on the program of rolling action, to raise awareness, etc. So again, we'd like your feedback on this, but it must be led by you. It can't be led by COPAC, okay? It must be led by you in your community, organizing the community hall, putting out the pamphlets, the posters, inviting the people to come, and we hopefully can resource some of that. But you got to lead that process. We also got to have constituency engagements. What we've recognized also in our process is that we're not talking to everybody, because we can't. But there are certain national organizations that we might have a conversation with, but we need to deepen. So we might have to have outreach to go and present to the national leadership of a Stockveld, for example, or the national leadership of a rural movement, or the national leadership of a trade union, etc. So we're building in for outreach and engagements. We're also building in for some coordination meetings And we do have people who volunteered coming out of the dialogues to be part of a working committee or coordination committee, but we want to operationalize that next year. But we want to invite somebody from Labour, Veja, and somebody from the rural movement, Nyanda, and maybe Chisimani to be part of that committee. So we're making this proposal here. And then, of course, there's the national event in Parliament. And we really want the organizations, particularly from Cape Town, to help lead that engagement for October next year. So we have SAFCs here, we have Chisimani here, we have the Children's Resources Center here, we have Mafta, and we have people from Philippi here, and so on. We have various activist groups in the room, including academics from Stellenbosch, who will also have to play their part in mobilizing for the assembly at Parliament next year in October. So we're hoping to work very closely with local organizations to lay the groundwork for that, and they must lead this process. Unite Behind has also been represented here. I forgot to mention that. Slow Food is also here. So there's quite a few organizations from Cape Town that can lead the build-up to the event in October in Cape Town in front of the gates of Parliament. And hopefully we can mobilize thousands of people to be there in front of the gates of Parliament. And together with the national network and the movement we're building, we'll also have to make sure we all get there. We bring our communities, etc., etc. And then, of course, the final thing is bringing in legal assistance and support. I've mentioned that. But here we just want to underline legal support for non-violent mass action, which I've mentioned, around disruption. So we don't go in there without support. We challenge Parliament in the courts if they don't adopt the Climate Justice Charter. And then, of course, legal intervention to speed up the removal or phase out of fossil fuels, Eskom, Sasol, etc. Now, all these things are not fully worked out, and we're hoping in the deliberation that ensues, we deepen and give flesh to this. Amanda.
Thank you, Comrade Vish, for starting off on a good footing for today. How we're going to work is we have 3 panelists. We have Sizwe from Naledi, we have Kenny from Veja, and we have Siamtanda from Inyanda. Each of them will be given 5 to 10 minutes. They can choose maximum 10 minutes to respond or to have any comments that they have on what Vish has just presented. After that, we will break up into groups and we will further and deepen the discussion. Okay, is this thing working?
Yes.
No?
It's just
yes?
really soft.
It's soft, isn't it?
So I think we turned it down when we did our thing down here. So can I have first off Kenny? I'll just go according to that line. Just go to see this.
Yes, it's working. Thank you, my lady. Thank you, comrade. Yes, we at Veja, we have the struggle, we're still struggling, but we are working for a common program that we're gonna lead the Val and the Gauteng, as Vichu was saying. To tell you, we're still having the problem, but we have adopted one of the schools in the Val. As you are speaking about the school here, we have adopted one of the schools. We are teaching those people about the climate change in the school. One other thing that we are doing at Veja, we are still continue moving forward, doing struggle actions, doing picketing, and doing all other things. On other matter, we have also went to the media. We have a platform on the radio every Tuesday, to pass the message of what we are still doing. Yes, things are tough. Things are still, people don't take it serious that we have a problem of climate change. We have a problem of drought. People are still struggling. Our small-scale organization are still struggling, which we need support for us to go to the government so that they can support people. We're still struggling with water. They don't want to give us boreholes. They don't want to give us. The companies that we have, big companies, they still continue to give us the air that is not good, that is not pure, but we are still pushing on to say to the people of South Africa that soon all this must change and we must adopt we must adopt this IPP, the independent power for solar, for hydro and biomass. We still continue, still teaching people. We are struggling, as we say, but we are moving, we are demonstrating, we are picketing, and we will continue doing that, I think.
Thank you, Comrade Penny. I think also added to your talk or to your input should be your support or what you thought about the plans that COPAC has put down. So that would be also useful for us to hear in your input. Thanks. Sizwe.
Amanda. Good morning, comrades. As mentioned, my name is Melisizwe Kiso. I work for an organization called NADEDI, which is the research wing of COSATU. So just quickly, trade unions have not traditionally been working in the climate change and environmental space. So over the past 4 years, we've been trying to conscientize trade unions around climate change and basically just the basics of what is climate change. We take it for granted that people understand what is climate change, and we've come to find out that it's actually not the truth. A lot of people still do not understand what we talk about when we talk about climate change. What are the causes of climate change? Considering the economy our reliance of our economy on the minerals and energy complex. It's in the backbone of the South African economy, and yet that makes us the biggest polluter in Africa of carbon emissions. And so how do we balance economic needs, jobs, as well as trying to deal or tackle with the issue of climate change? So the work that we've been doing is, I would say, it's just conscientizing the trade unions about climate change. And so, the actions that, and one of the strategies that we've used is to partner with civil society organizations, academics, such as Professor Jackie Cock, who was here yesterday. We have partnerships with WWF, Greenpeace Africa, Earthlife Africa, as well as 350.org, which Ferial was part of, and she knows some of the work that we've done in the climate change reference group. So just briefly, so the work that the proposals that Vish has put together and his team have put together, I think are a good way for us as trade unions to again strengthen those links and those ties that we have with civil society organizations. But one of the biggest challenges is that climate change has not been a big priority for the trade unions. And in the current economic context that we find ourselves in, when labor is faced with the changing world of work. There's increased economic downturn, there's restructuring, you find increased casualization, and there's a lot of precarity that's just happening within the labor market. And these have been the areas that the trade unions have been largely focused on. I mean, you just look at the issues around the restructuring of ESCOM. What's that going to mean for jobs, and how many job losses are going to be incurred as a result of this restructuring? The shutdown of the coal-fired power stations. 5 coal-fired power stations are going to be shut down over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to affect approximately that's going to affect approximately 30,000 workers. And if you consider that every worker has at least 3 to 4 dependents that rely on that salary, that's 120,000 people that are going to be affected by those shutdowns. So these are some of the considerations of the trade unions. The prices of services and goods have just constantly been increasing, but unfortunately the salaries have not been matching those the increases or inflation. And then there's also issues around SAA retrenchments. We've heard about retrenchments in SAA. The banking sector is planning to retrench approximately 6,000 workers. Mining is retrenching at Simanyego, but there's been a large number of retrenchments since approximately 2012, and now another retrenchment is planned by Simanye, which is looking at retrenching 5,000 workers. So you see, this is some of the challenges that we find ourselves in as trade unions, is that we recognize that there is a need to tackle climate change. But how do we reconcile the job losses? Where is the just transition plan? And this is why the trade unions have been calling for a just transition plan. Where is the reskilling that is required to ensure that trade workers whose jobs are at risk are able to be transitioned towards new opportunities in the green economy? Now, there's been lots of talk about having a green economy, but we should not be looking at this green economy as separate from the mainstream economy, because we believe that these are all interlinked. And so these are just some of the challenges or some of the dynamics around the trade union movement, as well as the politics. There's a lack of unity amongst trade union organizations. There's a competition for membership with job losses. Everybody's trying to ensure, all the trade unions are trying to ensure that we can get as many members as we can. But unity is built, especially around times of crisis or wage negotiations, like we're currently seeing now with the SAA strike. We have NUMSA, SATAO, and other unions working together. In the ESCOM negotiations earlier this year, we had both NUMSA and the National Union of Mine Workers working together. So there are opportunities, or there are spaces where the trade unions do come together, but there's still quite a lot of fragmentation within the trade union movement. And then again, as I mentioned, there are huge frustrations with the lack of a just transition plan. Because what's going to happen? Where are these new opportunities that we keep talking about? When and how are they going to be created? Where are the reskilling opportunities? So I think, the charter gives us a nice program that can be used to basically ignite unity and ignite action within not just us as trade union movement, but also strengthening the ties to civil society organizations, as well as academia and communities. So it also, and what's nice about the charter is it also provides a space for engagements, as well as provides some solutions as to how we can take the struggle going forward of achieving a just transition plan. And continuous engagements are vital in getting this deep just transition, which is something that as trade unions, we're calling for a just transition. The trade union, Comrade Vish is calling for a deep just transition. So these again are some issues that we need to unpack, so that we are all on the same page as to where is the end goal, where is the assignment that we're trying to get to, We may be using different vehicles to get to Azania, but we all have that common vision of getting to that Azania that we would like to see. And the challenges, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. The issue of political will, capacity within the trade unions. We still don't have many people who are dedicated towards working on climate change issues. So climate change is one within the basket, one issue within the basket of things that the trade unions have to work on. I mean, for example, in my organization, there are only 2 of us working on climate change. And in various other organizations, there are 1 or 2 people that are dedicated to working on climate change issues. Again, the unions need, and this is why the unions need to build capacity around climate change. And one of the things that we try and do in the education work that we've been rolling out is to do what we call the democratization of climate change knowledge. Now, language was mentioned quite a lot yesterday, the issue of language. How we speak to climate change is how we're going to gain the traction that we need in the communities when we engage in climate change issues. This is how we're going to get the buy-in from the people in the communities who are struggling and fighting on a daily basis for basic services such as food, housing, transport, water. These are the basic services, and I like how the Charter has incorporated the need for basic services within the Charter, and that is good. And again, let's not forget, as much as the trade unions have been calling for, trade unions have long recognized that climate change is a threat, and we need to move away from carbon and fossil, and we need to move away from the use of fossil fuels. But the big challenge is that in this call for moving towards renewable energy, we should be careful that it's not another site for capitalist accumulation. And that is the first thing that Comrade Jackie started off with, is that the crisis that we find ourselves in today is as a result of capitalist accumulation. So what we've seen is that these renewable energy projects are largely, the contracts are largely being awarded to big corporate, big international multinationals who are, most of them coming from outside the country. So we're not creating a socially owned renewable energy sector. In fact, that's one of the that's a call that trade unions have had since 2012, is to have a socially owned renewable energy sector. And so, the issues around the privatized renewable energy is a big fighting point, is a big point that we have, trade unions have been fighting against. And just to share, it's unfortunate that, finally we were able to have climate change as one of the climate change related issues, as one of the demands that we wanted to have on a strike that was organized for October. But unfortunately, that strike was interdicted by BUSA, which is the Business Unity of South Africa, and as a result, we were not able to have that march. But with the program that Vish is trying to roll out, at least now we're finding other platforms where we do get frustrated through court interdicts. We're able to then partner up with organizations, civil society organizations, to take the struggle going forward. I hope I haven't gone too long.
Thank you, Conrad. That was really very useful input. I think it's really getting our minds going for the discussion that will ensue. Our next speaker, Siyamtana.
Amandla.
Awethu.
Amandla. So my name is Siyamtana from the Inyanda National Land Movement. So Inyanda was formed on the 4th of December in 2014 in Port Elizabeth, where all its affiliates from different movements across the country, representing farmers, to fishers, to women, and young who were part of that delegation. Our vision as Inyanda National Land Movement is an egalitarian country that has equality, equitable land ownership, ecology sustainability, food sovereignty, as well as productive, self-reliant, and active citizens that know and claim their rights. Objectives: to mobilize, organize, fight for, and win democratic accountability, pro-poor and people-driven land redistribution, the dismantling of apartheid, geographic control of marine, fishing, water, mineral, and other natural resources, agrarian transformation. To fight for accountability, reparations, rehabilitation, and historical justice from all companies that have exploited, polluted, and degraded the natural environment. To mobilize, organize, fight for, and win ecological sustainability development. Also to mobilize, organize, and fight and win democratic alternatives on agroecology, food sovereignty, seeds, renewable energy, and the solidarity economy. Our view on ecology and climate crisis is that environmental crisis is one of the biggest problems in South Africa and Africa. In Brazil, Latin America, and Caribbean, and the world over, and is caused by climate change that is in turn caused by operations of the big corporations. It is also the view of Inyanda National Land Movement that mining and extractive today's model of farming, where chemical and deforestation contribute negatively to the rising of temperature of the globe to the detriment of its inhabitants. Inyanda National Land Movement believes that global warming causes drought, flooding, confuses weather pattern, and many diseases, thus affecting lives of many negatively. It also affects water resources, which are already scarce, thus affecting our food sovereignty. Inyanda National Land Movement is of the view that mechanization of fishing pollutes our coast, thus affecting the production of fish and even making life very unbearable for the fishers. Inyanda National Land Movement has noted that policies around and many other legal frameworks are in favor of commercial farming and coastal farming by big corporations, thus making it very difficult for smallholders farmers to survive. Inyanda National Land Movement has further noted that Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act was initiated by the World Bank and is taking away the rights of citizens to cleaner environment, thus violating the constitutional rights of the people and environment. The Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act is therefore unconstitutional. Mining always pushes communities off their land and is not acceptable. Inyanda National Land Movement has committed itself to mobilize the poor, unemployed, small-scale farmers, farm workers, and farm dwellers to pursue struggles against climate injustice and demand that the government must do the following: to get support from government for small-scale farmers and fishers to adapt to climate change, government to take climate change seriously. We want sustainable technology in agriculture, government to stop mega projects that serve interest capital. We demand sustainable energy. We know what climate change is, what causes it, and its consequences. And it is caused by industrial expansion that was enabled by our dispositions, and now that we bear the brunt of it. Yet our government continues to pursue a dirty energy policy. This must be reversed and that to be enabled to benefit and participate in alternative energy production. In the last few years, Inyanda National Land Movement has been involved in the following struggles and campaigns: to raise awareness and train small-scale farmers on agroecology. We have promoted and established seed banks as part of promoting agroecology. We have trained small-scale holder farmers to set up nurseries. We have organized community dialogues on water crisis and climate crisis. We have also organized people on the impact on drought and lobby government for support. We have also been working on supporting Amadiba crisis against mining, which has potential to contribute towards increasing gas emissions. We have also built strategic strategic partnership with Amnesty in Brazil and La Via Campesina to pursue food sovereignty campaign. Climate crisis is not only a South Africa crisis but a global crisis. In our area of work as Inyanda National Land Movement, the climate crisis has been manifested in many ways. The following has affected small-scale farmers and small-scale fishers the most. Drought, which has led to the total reduction in food production. Water sources, including dams, rivers, and underground sources, have dried up, making life for the marginalized very difficult. There has been an outbreak of unknown pests and diseases affecting mainly children as a result of this climate crisis. Skin rashes are part of those infections due to heat waves. Conventional ways of farming which promote use of chemical inputs has also contributed highly to this climate crisis. What we intend doing as Inyanda National Land Movement is to raise awareness on the causes, impact, and adaptation methods on climate change. Embark on planting of trees, since trees absorb a great deal of carbon dioxide. Engage with government so they develop a policy to protect the small-scale farmers in times like this. To promote agroecology as an alternative to conventional agriculture. Inyanda supports the Justice Charter and we will develop various strategies for the realization of its objectives and vision. We will also use media to profile the struggles of our people in pursuit of climate justice charter. Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. I think we will now break for our group discussions, and we will use the color.
The questions are
Yes. So the way that the group discussions will run is firstly, in your